Welcome to the NOSA Unleashed podcast, where we want to expose and remove the stigma surrounding mental health by discussing real-life challenges and obstacles that keep us paralyzed and fearful to move forward. Let us inspire you to believe there is more to life than what you are currently experiencing. Now is the time to end the silence and pursue the path to purpose and fulfillment. We will do this together because no one stands alone.
Welcome back to the NOSA Unleashed podcast. My name is Connie Blackwood, and joining me today is my lovely sister, Laura Burgoyne.
Hello.
And today we'll be talking about social anxiety. And I think this is a prevalent thing in our society more and more ever since COVID, and we got used to isolation, and now we find ourselves even more anxious to be in social situations because we became accustomed to our worlds of just, 6 people that we were allowed to have in our life or whatever it was at the time. And so I think this is becoming more and more prevalent because of that. And so I just wanted to share a time when I've experienced social anxiety in my past. And it's usually when I am meeting someone new. That's usually when I experience it, because I don't know what to expect. I've never met them. I don't know anything about them. And so that's usually when it creeps in. And then I'm like all up in my head instead of just being myself. And so sometimes I have to take a step back and go, okay, what am I doing here? Who am I? What is my purpose? And a lot of times when I refocus myself and I go, I just want to learn about this person, I really want to know what their story is, then I calm down, I have more confidence, and I just go in. And it's more of a fact-finding mission than, me being all up in my head about, am I the person that they want to talk to? And they seem genuinely like intrigued when I'm asking about their story, and then they ask about mine. And it opens a door for like that's to be like deeper right away off the hop, and it's really neat. And you'll know whether you can build a friendship or someone off the hop usually when you share your story with someone or they share their story with you, because you'll be like, wow, I can't relate to this person, this is beyond my understanding. Or you'll be like, oh, I totally understand, I've been there, right? And it'll give you a really clear indicator of whether or not you have a place to build a friendship on, for sure. How about you, Laura? Has there been a time when you've experienced social anxiety, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, I think for me personally, when I experience social anxiety, it mostly manifests itself when I, you know, feel like I need to be vulnerable with others,
Mm,
right? I can think of many times when, maybe I'm personally going through a lot of um, personal crises or losses and difficulties, and I need, I want to be with people and I want to be social and I want to have connection, but at the same time, I I don't feel like I'm ready to be vulnerable. And if anyone knows me, they know that I literally wear my emotions on my sleeve. So you can tell right away if I'm doing good or not, right? And a lot of times when I feel the most social anxiety is when I have to be in places with people and I know I'm not going to be able to hide what I'm feeling and I'm not ready to share, right? And um that really does cause me a lot of anxiety, and in fact, most of the time, like, I don't wanna go, I don't wanna be there, right? Because I don't wanna have to explain to people, you know and this actually just happened this past week, and, this person, came up to me and said, "How are you doing?" Right? And inside, like, and then when I said, "Fine," they said, "Are you sure?" And it's like, I don't I just find those so awkward, right? Because it's just like, I'm not in some ways, I'm still processing my own stuff,
mhm,
right? I'm still trying to figure out what it is that I'm even feeling. How am I, coping with some of the things that I'm going through? And, it's really hard for me. And I find that I tend to withdraw and isolate more when I feel like I'm going through the thick of things, totally successful, sharing my victories after the fact, but it's like actually sharing my journey as I'm going through the crap that I find so difficult, right? Which is strange because, I don't have difficulty with vulnerability generally, but in these social settings, I just seem to get triggered for some reason, right?
So one thing I would encourage you is like, if you're still processing, so that that person knows that they're not completely off their rocker and not completely misreading you, you can say, well, actually, I just need time to process through what I'm going through. I'm not doing great, but I don't know how to share this with anyone. Can you pray for me?
Right.
Right. And that would open the door for them to be able to feel like they're caring for you in the only way that they can. Right. And then you
Mhm.
don't have to tell them, because if you don't know, it opens the door for you to still be processing, but still keep that connection.
Yeah. The other thing too I found is if I'm too closed off or don't share something, sometimes those people can leave with the assumption that what I'm experiencing has something to do with them, right? And they can actually have this perception that somehow they are responsible for how I'm feeling negatively. And I think that is also a root to a lot of social anxiety that people feel is we make false assumptions.
I agree. I think false assumptions is one of the biggest things, because we get in our heads about, oh, this person must think this because they said this, or this person must think this because they did this, or this person walked away from me in the middle of our conversation and I have no idea why. And it could be something as simple as they are having a heat flash and they immediately need to go outside just to cool down. Or it could be all of a sudden they got an emergency text and they know they have to go, right? They knew if
Yeah.
they got this text, they had to leave right away. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know what's going on that they haven't talked to you about. And so to just assume that it's about you is difficult, because it may not have anything at all to do with you.
Yeah.
You know, what other thoughts do you have about assumptions, Laura?
Well, I do think that they're formed by what we believe people think about us,
Hmm.
right? Um, because if I actually have a foundational view that, I am loved and I'm accepted and I can actually be authentically myself, then I find that I'll do that less. But
Hmm.
if I already have this like internal dialogue that, you know what, I'm not accepted, I'm not a good enough. Somehow I have to please people or, be someone that I'm not, right? Then I almost find that when I'm in that kind of mindset, I pick up any little signal and I misinterpret it every time, right? And I
Hmm.
think that the one thing that we need to be mindful of and maybe put into practice more often is instead of making those assumptions, we ask questions, right?
Hmm.
Like to not be afraid to actually go up to that person and say, "You know what? I noticed this happened. You know, what's going on in your life?" Or, like, "Tell me more about that." Or and find out information instead of just making those assumptions, right? Because we we do this all the time. Like, I I have to catch myself doing it constantly, and it's just like, "Laura, this has nothing to do with you." And I think if we can also come from a perspective of not focusing on ourselves, right? And being more external and, even having the focus point of how can I serve others, right? Then we're not going to be so internally focused, right? And I find that, we won't take those little nuances personally. We're not going to take them as somehow that was part of me. Like I did something to cause these things to happen, right? Which I think is really one of the biggest roots of social anxiety,
Hmm. I agree.
right?
I find it interesting that you mentioned asking questions, because a situation happened this weekend where, I ran into somebody that I had invited to our church, And they were very quiet on the matter. And I never really brought it up because I was like, oh dear, they must have had a bad experience. And I was all up in my head about it. And then I started asking questions and I found it was the opposite. They had this wonderful healing moment, but I would never have found out about if I didn't ask questions. So
Yeah.
asking questions is so, so important because I would have kept going on thinking, oh, she's never going to want to come back to our church because she had this horrible experience and she did just never want to come back. And it's what that wasn't the case at all. In fact, when I said, well, you're invited anytime, she was like, oh, I'd love to come back when I have time. So,
Yes.
I was just like, wow, this is completely opposite of what I thought it was going to be. And so that just shows how much our assumptions can be off the mark based on what we see and misinterpret because we're not in their head, we're not in their heart. We can only gauge from what we see, and we don't see everything that's going on in their lives. And so it's important that we keep that in mind, right?
Well, and that's the thing I think we need to really prioritize is that we all need connection,
Mhm.
right? Like you mentioned earlier, we just came through a very long season of isolation, and I think many people have not recovered. Many people are still, you know, facing the impact of that time, and it's having really negative impacts. And I think we need to be open to fellowship, open to actually being with people. And, when you feel that social anxiety, your inclination is to retreat, to be in isolation. But we have to push past that fear, recognize it for what it is, right? And then, develop coping strategies to how we can re-enter into relationships even in the midst of the anxiety, but then be able to do like we said, ask those questions, right? Because then that will be able to help resolve some of that. Just like if we know the truth, right? Then all of those assumptions, all of those thoughts, like all of those things that are holding us back, those can really get resolved. But we have to be willing to re-enter into relationship.
For sure. And I think sometimes it's also letting go of like our perception of what's going on. Like, because
Right.
our perception is based on our experiences, our worldview, our opinion of ourselves. And it's not necessarily even the opinion that we have of the person that we're talking about or that we're
Mhm.
talking to, right? And so a lot of times we don't even understand why this person would be acting that way or saying something, right? Because we're not in their shoes. And, you know, I love getting to know people because it helps me get to know what shoes they're walking in. There's this other girl that I met probably about a couple years ago. And when we first met, we didn't hit it off at all. And I was just like, oh dear. And we go to church together, right? So I was like, she'll just be an acquaintance. And then one Sunday, about 6 months later, she came up to me and she's like, would you and your husband like to join us for lunch? And I was like, sure, why not? Right. So then we joined them for lunch and we found out that she is exactly like my husband and I'm pretty much exactly like her husband. And we were like talking like gangbusters. And now we're closer than ever because now I understand where she's coming from because I'm like, oh, okay, well, I understand where you're coming from because you're so much like Walter. Okay, I get why you're saying it that way. And it has changed everything about our friendship, but I would have never discovered that if I didn't keep that door open and I had
Yeah.
kept my original opinion, right?
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
what one piece of advice would you give someone who's suffering with social anxiety and doesn't know what to do? It doesn't even want to leave the house.
I would say you need to step out in courage, right? Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's actually moving forward in the presence of fear, right? Because social anxiety really is fear based, right?
Mhm.
We're afraid of what people will think about us. We're afraid of what might happen in that situation. We might be afraid about how we're going to respond or react, or, it's all rooted in fear. And in order for you to overcome this social anxiety, you need to be actually willing to face it, but you do that with courage, right? And, you don't have to do it alone. Have someone that you trust go with you into these social settings so that if it goes sideways, if it goes wrong, you have an out. You have someone there to back you up, but you're not closing yourself off from actually living, right? You need to be able to reintegrate yourself into these relationships, and it'll be hard at first. Trust me, and sometimes it's still hard for me. I still struggle sometimes, especially in new settings with new people, right? But, you just have to face it. You have to face it with courage. And, yeah, that would be my biggest recommendation or suggestion.
And I think my biggest encouragement is this: the worst thing that can happen is that you'll experience a little bit of rejection on your pathway to finding friends. And, if you get to the point where you realize that that's okay, that's an okay price to pay to have really amazing friends, then
Mhm.
you're not going to be as anxious about meeting new people or going into those social situations, because that's the biggest thing you're risking, is that there's a potential that you might have a little bit of rejection. But you know what? It's worth it for the friendships you can walk away with by just being able to step out into those places and finding those people that you connect with on those levels. And you won't find it by staying at home. You just won't.
Yes.
And so we just want you to know that you can do this. You can go out and you can find these friends. You can go out and mingle with people, you know, even if you've been stuck in your house since COVID, there's a whole world out there waiting for you. And there's people who need you in their lives that may not ever see you if you don't leave your home. And so I would encourage you, like Laura said, take that leap of courage, take that step of courage, and, you might be pleasantly surprised by what you find.
Yeah.
So,
That's
Laura, do
awesome,
you have
Connie.
any final words?
If you're struggling in this area, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Mhm.
You know, Connie and I, and we have other mentors coming on board that we would love to just journey with you and help you sort through, why you're experiencing some of these social anxieties, why you are finding it difficult to really engage in relationship and help you find the roots to those things. So if that is something that you want to have more support in, feel free to check out on our website at nosafoundation.com and book an appointment with one of our mentors. And we would love to meet with you. So I think that's all that I have to share. So until next time, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next podcast. Bye.
Bye.